We had to say that of all the films we watched, of all the submissions that got submitted to last year's edition of the festival, this was the most fun to watch.
No, it was fun then, and it's nice to be able to share this with an audience in the U.S., especially to the Vietnamese American community.
Indeed. Now, in my intro, I did mention that your film, Daydreamers, is among the first horror films, if we want to call it horror, films made by a major Vietnamese studio after the relaxation of censors. Could you describe the difference between basically what the environment was like, filmmaking-wise, before and after the relaxation of those censors over there?
Yeah, I think it's much more relaxed now. When I developed this 5 years ago or so, it wasn't possible. Everyone was telling me you couldn't make a vampire movie because you couldn't even do ghost stories back then. So it was a very slow process. I went through many drafts, and it's all about timing. And Vietnamese cinema, the censor board, I think today is starting to understand and realize it's important of telling Vietnamese stories so our stories can travel beyond Vietnam. And censorship sometimes will hinder that. And I think the censorship over the last 5 years has gotten more relaxed with the type of stories we can tell, the type of imageries we can show, as long as we stay out of politics. Don't get involved with politics.
I said relaxation, not a lifting.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Tim, you wrote a beautiful piece, by the way, a few days ago, published the day, the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which would have been April 30th. And in it, you write that much of Daydreamers, which, to speak broadly, is about someone on the margins of society, reflected some of your experiences coming over to the United States. Could you speak a little more to that here?
Yeah, you know, when I came here in 1975, and as a young child, growing up in America, you're very confused at that time. The war just ended. The wounds are still fresh. The wounds are still fresh for the side that lost. And in American films, they wanted to kind of show the heroic. So you're seeing movies like Rambo and Platoon, and you're seeing the soldiers. And I love those movies, but every time I went to the theater to watch it, and I'm get into the movie, and in the moments when the Vietnamese faces, the Viet Congs in the jungle come up, I kind of slide down on my seat, you know, because that was a depiction. So I've always felt when I have an opportunity to make movies, yeah, at that moment, of course, I didn't think I would ever make a movie, but if you have an opportunity, when that opportunity arises, I was going to show a different side of representation. And that started with 3 seasons when me and my brother went back to Vietnam for the very first time. And being in the country of Vietnam opened our eyes. We're like, oh, wait, we're not the enemy. You know, this is, you know, it was a war, but my uncle, my family, my relatives, and I connected with them. I found my roots. And then we made 3 seasons. And then that was a success. And we had opportunity to go make other movies, but me and my brother said, we have to tell our story. So then we went and made Green Dragon. And we wanted to make a film that reflected on our family's journey to America. So it's very important to be able to show representation. And, you know, I'm very proud of this film because we're able to, even though I made it in Vietnam for a local audience, but be able to find a distributor through Dark Star, U.S. distribution company, to take it not only to the Vietnamese community, but more mainstream to the genre community, and to be accepted by the genre community is something that I didn't expect, but very happy, yeah.
And speaking of genre and your distributors, I was speaking to your distributor out in the lobby, and what I find remarkable about your film is that it occupies a space in horror that I don't think we see much of. let me elaborate. I think a lot of people these days associate horror with extremely serious, extremely dark, man, my life feels absolutely terrible sort of horror films. We're thinking about the most recent Nosferatu, maybe Ari Aster's Hereditary, very, very serious films. On the far spectrum, you have horror comedies, the Abbott and Costello's Meet Frankensteins and maybe the Scooby-Doos in the world. But your film occupies a space that I think is much more neglected, the middle. The thing that maybe a Vincent Price AIP film would have occupied, something that's pulpy. And I was wondering, how did you choose upon the tone that your film would occupy? Because again, a lot of recent vampire films are extremely heavy and serious.
I didn't set out to make a vampire movie, so that was the first thing. Vampire was just a way in to tell a story about something that's more personal. I've always grew up with, like I was saying, coming to America, racial identity, self-identity, who am I, and trying to be authentic and live an authentic life. So that was then, when I was in Vietnam, I felt, I love vampire, I grew up with vampire movies, and I just felt vampires are always about hiding in the shadows. And Vietnam hasn't done a vampire movie, so I said, well, what if I take the vampire genre and tell it in a way that reflects about family divide, brotherhood, and what's the love of two brothers and what would get in their way. And once I started exploring that, and then I started noticing communities that live along the riverbank of Saigon for the first time. And I was like, who are these people? Who lives there right on the border of the margin of a modern society? So then I started to put the pieces together. So I always say, look, if I stick to the heart, just make it personal and make it like something that's very personal and make it from the heart. And the vampire genre would just be a way in and make it fun and accessible. That was kind of the way, my approach.
All right. I'll have one more question before we toss it out to all of you. And that final question was, what was it like working with your cast? What were some challenges? What were maybe some more joyful moments on set with them? How did you coach them?
Casting was tough. I really wasn't sure I could make this film because it hasn't been done in the cast, and vampires they're not part of the cultural zeitgeist in Vietnamese culture. And I knew Marco was going to be my pillar. If I couldn't find Marco, I wouldn't have this film because he had to be vulnerable, mysterious, handsome, all the check boxes. And then once you find him, you got to find a brother that looks like brother and can go toe-to-toe with him. And in Vietnam, there's the North and the South, and the accent is very different. And Marco's from the South, and there were many good actors that had Northern accent. And that didn't work. So we spent like 4 months casting, and then once I narrowed it down to like 5 for each role, I did intensive mix and match. So I brought Marco in to read with 3, 4, 5 other potential Nhuk to see if there was chemistry. So that was a very intensive process. With Chipu was somebody that I knew kind of early on, very early on, that you have to kind of have a name in the movie. She wasn't easy. She didn't agree to it right away because of the nature of the role. 2 weeks before the film started, she actually wanted to back out. And
when you say the nature of the role, what do you mean? When you say she was considering not doing this because of the
Chipu is a very famous singer there. This was, it's a risky role, and there were elements in there that I wanted her to play the way the character. we had a long talk, and at one point she wasn't sure she can commit the time that I wanted for her to prepare. But after talking to her through it, I gave her time. I never pressured her. Even 2 weeks away, I said, look, if you don't feel up for it, don't worry about me in the film. You can walk away, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. In my mind, of course, I'm like, please don't leave, please. I had no backup, you know? But if someone does, you know, but then when I think I gave her that space with no pressure, I think she felt a lot of pressure. And I said, look, I will get acting coach, get you private workshop. And, you know, obviously she agreed. But then when she came in to do the camera test with Tuan, immediately their chemistry and sparks, even before we got into the turn on the camera, when they were just in the lobby. And I was like, okay, they're a couple.
That's lovely to hear. Now we turn it over to you. Do you have any questions for our esteemed director here? If so, please raise your hand. I'll recognize you. And yeah, we have some time here. Gentleman up here.
Thank you. I understand the Asian film requirement of martial arts, but with a vampire film, there's several chases you incorporated in this film. Could you tell me, was there any reasons for how many chases you used, and you know, what does it represent?
How many chases?
Chase scenes.
Chase scenes. There you are. How many chase scenes? Yes. What do they represent? I don't remember how many chase scenes. I don't know.
Well, when you have a car and a tricycle going after each other, and it's like, and they're both sort of fighting each other equally, I was saying, okay.
Yeah, I didn't even count like how many chase scenes, but what did they mean?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think there was any
Okay.
deeper meaning than there was just.
way to get from A to B.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question, though. I never thought about that.
Well, in the back over there. Mid. Way in the back.
Hi. So what other like vampire related movies like gave you inspo for this movie?
Was there any other? The very first vampire movie I ever saw was 1979, around there. It's called Prince of Darkness, Dracula. And it was with Christopher Lee. I remember watching it at home with my mom. And I was so scared, but it was the classic Dracula with the cape, the bloodshot eyes, the fangs, the slick back hair. Holy water, sleeping in the coffin, dying by the stake. I thought all vampires were like that. You know, that was the classic kind of vampire. And then when I was a teenager, I grew up in Sunnyvale, and there was a movie called The Lost Boys that came out, shot up the street. And for the first time, I'm like, oh, well, this spoke to me in a different way. You know, telling about the teenager outside on the skirts of society, trying to fit in. And you know, as a teenager, that's what we go through. So it spoke to me. And then, I don't know, maybe, what was it, 8, 9 years ago, a film called Let the Right Ones In, then spoke to me in a whole different way. I'm like, oh, wow, you can tell a vampire movie this way. So I'm just a cinema lover. I watch movies, good movies, genre movies. I've never been someone who seeks out vampire movies. But I think, you know, all those influence subconsciously has influence on me. A lot of people were like saying this is Lost Boys. Could be. I didn't sit there and purposely, but in Vietnam, everyone rides motorcycle. So it wasn't like, you know, but in Vietnam, that's 80% of the people there ride motorcycles or mopeds. But I just felt also the freedom it represented for those vampires. But those are some of the influence. Another big influence was a film called The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Dark at Night, something like that. It's an Iranian vampire movie.
Yes.
Yeah, that film had a huge emotional connection with me. There were some scenes in there that still stuck imprint in my mind. I've watched a lot. There's film Raw was something that completely unexpected. So I think subconsciously, as you're writing, but I always stuck to the family, the brothers, as the core.
Yeah, I see a bit of Lost Boys in here, and
Yeah.
the Christopher Lee, the Hammer horror films. I define those as
Yeah.
pulpy horror.
Someone told me later, I didn't even know, and then I looked, it was true. There's a character in The Lost Boys named Marco. It was the blonde guy, I forgot his name. I was like, oh, but it was spelled different.
There you have it. Another question out there. Men, come down a little forward.
Okay, can I piggyback off her since I already have the mic? Sorry, I'm going to be.
Okay, please go ahead. Please ask your question.
So I noticed that you had a very distinct disparity between the wardrobes of the different characters. Your lead being in more of a casual streetwear, very urban, very very normal and human, while your vampire, who were more aligned with Marco's, hey, we're the top dogs of this society and of this underground, kind of leaned more into the classic vampire aesthetic with, the kind of bondage gear and the black and the leather and the sexified vampires, if you will. Was that a deliberate decision to show disparity between one's willingness, Marco's willingness to embrace the darkness of his nature, while his brother rejected it, or was it just like your wardrobe department going like, this looks good on him?
About the look for Marco? Yeah, Marco, because I wanted to show a contrast. I mean, it's once he met Strio, the backstory, the queen vampire, she brought a whole new world to him, a whole new wardrobe, a whole new feeling than the world he was in before. So it was through a lot of process. My costume designer, I sent her a lot of inspiration, just showing her the contrast of the two worlds. And then kind of telling her, don't just trust your instinct and show me what you have, in this world, if this is two worlds and the contrast of it. And I said, for Marco, try to make him as loud as you can, because to contrast the world he was in, if he's living in a world now with pure freedom, and he's living under partnership with Drew, what would you come up with? So she brought a lot of the creativity to the look of the modern vampire. In the vampires who kind of live on the boat, we wanted to keep it more muted colors, and kind of keep it more of traditional country outfit, that because they lack anything in their society that is of modern connection, even though they live on the fringe of the modern society. So hopefully the whole thing was just how do we have the contrast of the two worlds.
I will say that Marco, and I'm probably projecting a little bit, and my Vietnamese is not good enough because I'm sure there's a term. Marco screams to me as this millennial who, with the opening of Vietnam's economy, is extremely, how do we say it? Oh, he's a party boy. Let's put it there. And he's just, you know what I mean. So.
Well, I think also is, there's a line, he's like, I think that's who he really wants to be, his true self. And I think because being locked up in that society for so long in the boat community, and he was able now to be on the other side, and so I think that was, whether it was how he saw himself, but that's why that scene at the end with the two brothers in the river, we keep seeing the flashback, always points back to really who his heart and soul. That's who, no matter how far you go away from who you are, at the end, he's still who he is, Yeah, the older brother who wants to protect the younger brother.
Another question out there, right in front of you, Corey.
Hi. Okay, so I'm very new to all this, but I'm just very curious. You're in Vietnam now, Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, whatever, and there's a growing creative culture in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh, blah, 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 whatever. Music, movie, dance scene, you being on the foot ground there, being from both here in the States and then going back to Vietnam, and you just said like the censorship has been uplifted more. What do you see as the future of creatives of Vietnamese people? Because they are coming up, they're utilizing the internet, they're utilizing a lot of platforms. Vietnam is moving to modernity. The 50 years has passed. There's like a burst of creativity happening right now in Vietnam. Like, what do you see right now?
What do I see in Vietnam creativity?
Essentially, what do you think? What do you envision as is the future looking like?
Oh, I think, Vietnam, Vietnamese cinema, you really think about it, is very, very young. I'm talking about like, maybe it's only 15 years old. I mean, of course, we've been making movies for a long time, but the explosion is very young. It's still in its infancy. What I love about Vietnam is so many young, aspiring filmmakers who have access to films from all over the world because of the internet influences, not just movies, art, culture. And they have so many amazing ideas and stories, but always tied in to their own sensibility and culture and how to tell it in a fresh way. The obstacle right now for that in Vietnam is, and it's in baby steps for the studios or the money people or the investors, to slowly take risk to tell those stories and allow the young filmmakers to tell stories, bring Vietnamese cinema to the next level. And that's a constant battle that's happening over there currently. But Vietnam today, I think, is still one of the rare countries that our box office is still very, very healthy compared to other countries when box office is dwindling down. Vietnamese young kids love to go to the cinema. And, we got films now going to Cannes, Toronto, everywhere. So many. Just won like the best director at Cannes for, I forgot the name of the movie, a few years ago.
Taste of Things, Janan Hung's Taste
Yeah.
of Things, yes.
But so the voices are there, and the future looks bright. I'm really excited for what's happening in Vietnam.
We have time for a few more questions. Fellow down in front.
I heard you speak about the fact that you're not allowed to make films that are political in your country. And I wanted to ask, when you're writing a film like this, how do you avoid making it political when, to me, a lot of the vampire movies that I've come to adore are about religion and religiosity. And if you look at like Anne Rice's work, it's about the book Angels and Demons, and it's prefiguring the demons pre-flood coming to earth and them augmenting and transforming society. And I see some of that in this movie, and their fixation on the law and the subculture, perversion of society, and I see Jacob and Esau and Cain and Abel. So I'm thinking to myself, well, if this is biblical and religious, it is political. It might not be governmentally political. So I'm asking myself, how does he write this and try to keep it from being political in the governmental sense when inherently it kind of is to me? So I'd like to ask you that.
Yeah, I think when I say political, I mean, Vietnam and because of the war in '75, there's a divide. It's still a communist country. And, just a few days ago was the 50th anniversary of the end of the war. In America, we call it the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, we call it the American War. In Vietnam, they just had a 13,000 military parade with jets, and here, it was remembrance. So that's what I mean by political. Don't want to get into that side of the politics. Religion's a different thing, so I was very conscious of it. Catholicism in Vietnam is tolerated, but it's not an official religion. So I knew vampire going in. The scene where I shot in the church, I was very debating, and if you watch it again, there's a cross in the front. And I went through 3 different edits. I erased the cross because I was afraid I was going to get flagged in censorship. The cross that we see, which you comes down and she's hanging, originally it was a full cross. We kind of redesigned it a little bit, so it's not so obvious. So those things I'm aware of. But what I heard now is films that deal with, I've seen it in other films with Catholic religion or priests, is a little bit more tolerable. Because Vietnam's a Buddhist, more of a Buddhist society. But yeah, you're right. When dealing with vampire films, you can't help but touch upon it.
I was not expecting that question, but a great question. Anybody else have a question right now? Fellow right
That's
here.
why I took out the scene with the cross with holding. Stay back.
Hi. At the beginning of the film, there's an animation that plays that's very beautifully done, but is also something of an expository cutscene to open up the film. Was that always planned to be part of the film, or was it a concession, in the middle or late in filming to get information in that you weren't able to shoot scenes for?
I kind of only did that because I was shooting this in Vietnam for the Vietnam market. I had to find a way in that makes sense to the local audience, because vampire is not part of the cultural zeitgeist. Twilight ruined it for me when I sent it to everyone. Was like, wait, our vampires can't go out into daylight? It's they know vampires, but it's not of West, because it's a Western mythology character. So I had to find a way in, and of course I had drafts where we actually was gonna go and shoot in the jungle where the vampires came in and destroyed Nyuk and Marco's family. That's why I hint to it in the end, in the final act on the picture frame. It was of the Frenchmen and Marco. They were servants to the French, colonial French at the time. But obviously I couldn't do that, and I had to find a way in. And I was originally just going to do text to kind of give the audience perspective. But then I found a company a friend of mine, that Blank Negative, that would do 2D animation. And so we're like, let's do a 2D to show the visual of how, to set up the history of how European vampires came to Vietnam.
If I can clarify, were you unable to do the destruction of the village scene because that would lead to political, as in like imagery of, destruction of villages in the war, or was there some?
No, it was just budget. Yeah, budgetary, yeah.
Tim, if I may follow up on that, the suggestion that they were servants to the French. I'm not saying it would have been better or worse if you had done so, but did you ever consider setting this during the colonial period?
Possibly, the way the film ends, the way I wrote a whole outline, and it was going to be kind of like Godfather 2, parallel 2 worlds. This story would continue, but also the story of the family with the mother back when they were just villagers working. But that was the idea, to kind of parallel those two worlds together.
I'm trying to imagine who would be Fredo in the boat right now.
Yeah.
Anyways, any other, probably the final question, way back there, Corey.
Hello. So sort of piggybacking off of like the concerns and the questions of other people who've already asked questions, I wanted to like dig more into what your idea is of like returning to the family, because you mentioned that at the end of the story, like they still are brothers. I've also noticed that in like my life, the older Vietnamese adults who enjoy going out to the cinema, they expect Vietnamese stories to be returning like to the family, even if they explore relationships outside of that. So I'm also wondering, like, because the younger Vietnamese like cohort that's really into cinema, they tend to be more socially minded and they are more willing to question those kinds of ideas. So I'm wondering, you know, how do you balance that? And do you think that, you know, the future Vietnamese cinema, like still underneath those censors, can balance that? Having both like a social concern that's also like political, but also still having, I guess, like those more essential Vietnamese characteristics of cinema, which is like returning to the family.
It's a multi-pronged question, but I think the first part was more on the familial dynamic between the two brothers, correct? Was that a yes? Yes. Can you talk about the familial dynamic between the two brothers, how you developed that?
You know, in the vampires are always by nature stories about dark and light, good and evil, right and wrong. And I started first, if there's, you know, Marco was a character who, you know, a true vampire doesn't choose to be a vampire, but if you're a vampire, you are going to go and you crave for blood. And living in a world where they create this story of the monk, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure. But that story is to keep them, in a way, safe because of what happened at the village. Nyuk was the one who tasted blood first. He witnessed his mom. He witnessed his mom killing the village girl. He understands the power of that. It scares him. You know, it scared him for the thirst of it. So he tries to refrain from it. Marco, on the other hand, I wanted to tell a story about two brothers with two different ideology, but both are actually one. Marco was always, if the end scene for me was, Marco was always struggling. He always wanted to be in the light. That's why he tells Nyuk, one day when you find the light, don't forget me. He just struggled with it. And I think that's the inspiration of just having two brothers, one dark, one light, but they switch places. And that allowed me to explore two different worlds of two different ideology of good and evil. And sometimes it's not just so black and white. If that's how I understood the question.
If we understood that question correctly, did we? Sort of?
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think we are out of time here. I will again reiterate that the 16th edition of Viet Film Fest is this October. It will be here in person at the Frida Cinema, and we'll have virtual offerings too, because there's no possible way for you to catch all the films if you come in person. But thank you all for coming out to the Frida this evening. I know it's a little on the late side on the Friday, but hell, it's Friday. What are we talking about? That's right. Thank you again for coming out to see Daydreamers. Myself and other VAALA and VIF staff will be here if you have more questions about Viet Film Fest and our organization. I imagine Tim will be straggling around too. So if you have more questions for him, feel free to talk to him. But if we could have one more round of applause for our director.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, VAALA. Thank you, Frida. Thank you, Dark Star. It means a lot to be able to, you know, bring this film to the U.S. And you know, tonight's a special night. I just flew in from Vietnam. I'm gonna fly to up north, San Jose, do another couple Q&A, and then we open the 9th, May 9th. We open May 9th.
And an entertaining film it is too. If you have friends that you would like to recommend to go see this film, or if you want to see it again, I believe it opens at the, correct me if I'm wrong, distributors, the Regal Garden Grove next week here in Orange County.
Is it Regal or the Block?
I think it's the Regal.
Is it?
Very sure it's a Regal.
Is that what he told you?
AMC Orange?
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
excuse me. The AMC Orange next week. I'm sure there might be some other theaters too that may be participating, so keep an eye out for next weekend. But thank you all, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.